different than usual because I am working directly from the iPad Pro. And just to remind everyone from the previous podcast is I have the 12.9-inch version. I use Photoshop with this. There is access to also to Adobe Camera Raw, but the full versions of this software is not available on mobile devices. So it's it's quite limiting on here, but at the same time, I feel like I'm able to do pretty much the basics of what I have to do with lighting. So I'll go ahead and share my thoughts about that. All right, so here's the home page for Photoshop. Uh, and there's tutorials up here for everyone who wants to know about um, what we can and cannot do with this particular software on the iPad. But the main thing that you see here is the hold on is the Apple Pencil. So that's what I'm using. Um, I do have a Logitech keyboard trackpad that I'm using so you guys can see my cursor because you can't see that using your fingers on the iPad or with the Apple Pencil. So the cursor here on the trackpad is good for this. Now, this is the one that we're going to edit or we're going to look at now. It is on the cloud, and once these edits are done, I'm going to keep this file on the cloud and then jump on the Mac Mini and do any cleaning up as far as the healing brush, things like that. I will do those edits over there. But this is the just the basics of where I start, right? So what I did get into a bit last week is composition, and this is just building off of that. Now, as far as composition, we talked about the rule of thirds and how when you're composing everything, um, what you're photographing, you do want to use the rule of thirds. So this is the first line here. It's basically cutting the photograph into three, both ways, like horizontal and vertically. So vertically, you have a line here. You have the second line is here, right? So you have three slices, right? And then horizontally, you have a line here, and then you have another line here. Now, where those intersect is where you want the focal point of your photograph. So you can have a point here, a point around here, here, and here. So that's really where the focal point of your capture should be. Now, can we break the rules? Of course. And from the last photo shoot that I did last weekend, I haven't been taking photographs quite often this year, and so I didn't stick to my principles, and so my focal points can be a little bit off. And this is a little bit off, but it's not terribly bad. But we stick to the rule of thirds most of the time because it's just how the human eye reads the photograph. We like to see the focal point of the artwork on of the photograph really on one of those points, right? That I pointed out. So for this one, I'm close to that point that's here, that intersection is here. And then of course this is a smart file, so there's a little icon there. And like I mentioned before, having a smart filter, that means that your image is not flat. It's still a digital negative. So it's not a JPEG, it's not a PNG. It's still a digital negative, like it hasn't been developed yet. And so you want to keep that digital negative, keep a copy of that so that you'll always have all of that information in your photograph. Because once you flatten it to a JPEG, that file is going to be compressed. And so a compressed image you start losing that information in the photo. All right. So once you pick out a photo that you like, it's got a good composition, it's going to be probably darker. Well, mine is. Mine is darker because it's a little bit underexposed. So you have to handle the photo accordingly. But the thing that I mentioned before is with your computer monitor, or in this case, the iPad monitor, I come down here and you see my brightness. So instead of my brightness being up here where it normally is, I lower it all the way down to about this point, right? So I put it down there because if your monitor is too bright when you're editing your photo, you're going to brighten the photo maybe not as much as you need to. So let's say that your brightness is up here. You're going to think, okay, the photograph looks fine. It looks bright enough. You send the file off to the printer. And then once you get the photo back, you're going to look at the print and think to yourself, this photograph is too dark. Why did it print too dark? On my monitor, it looks bright enough, but when you get the print in the mail, it's going to be too dark. And that's because the brightness on your monitor is too high. So that's why I say before you even start with the leveling or the dodging, burning, anything like that, take your brightness and lower it down. Now, for me, I went through the whole trial and error of how dark does my monitor need to be for this iPad. So for me, this is what I found is that this particular setting right just below the little sun, this is where it needs to be. And so when the photographs came in, the samples came in the mail, or the photos that I took, this matched up pretty well to the screen. So I thought, okay, and I've been using this setting ever since, and my prints have come out pretty good. But like I said, make sure that if you're using like an external monitor or you're on the iPad, just lower the brightness down for sure. And then when your prints come in, you can compare the print to what you actually see on the monitor and make sure that it looks as bright as you think it should be. So yeah, so that's what I do first. And so here's the raw file. What I like to work with first is the levels. So with the iPad, the user interface is weird, right? Because first of all your adjustments are not available on the iPad version. So that type of stuff you have to leave out. The adjustment layer is here. Here are the options that are available. And sometimes I use exposure, but exposure is just if you want to do like a blanket brightness to everything across the board at the same time. The highlights, the shadows, the midtones, if you use exposure, it's going to brighten up everything in one sweep, right, of an adjustment. So I like to use levels because that's something that I don't want to do. Now you look down here, little mountains. Now on this side is your blacks. Over here, there's a little black button. This side is all your whites at 255, and then all your midtones is in the middle. Now, this is underexposed, and so your whites don't start until you get to around where your midtones are supposed to be. So that's why I say this photograph is underexposed. I can't show you that I'm using my Apple Pencil, but I am. You can either use your Apple Pencil or your fingers, or you can use a trackpad. But again, once you have a photo that you really like, this is what I start with here. And it's like, where are these? Now you can go extreme, right? Of course, it's way too bright, and then you can back off to see where you need to stop, right? And I'm thinking not too bright. But you see the bottom of the mountain? I call it a mountain here, which is this little area here. That's where your whites start. So that's going to be the proper exposure. So this little mountain here, these peaks, they're really going to tell you where your information is. So all your midtones are here in the middle, and then your blacks are going to be on this end, right? So if you use the blacks down here, you move this over, everything's going to get darker. So for me, the shadows are fine. The shadows are fine. The midtones and the highlights are a little mucky. Um, so that's what I'm going to try to adjust here. For the most part, I don't move the midtones, but sometimes you have to. Especially if you don't want to move your shadows. Okay, so if you raise up the midtones above 1.00, if you kick that up, it's going to make everything brighter. If you go below 1, everything's going to get darker. So the last photo I did like this, I put it at about 90. And then I kicked this up a little bit more. So yeah, I don't know if I'm going to do that for this one. Now let's say right there. That's 85. Yeah, I want to bring some of that detail like down here. I want to bring some of that back out. I'll go 95 for right now. Get a little bit darker. And bring the highlights down a little bit. Now, for me, this is a pretty good base. Let me back out some. All right, so this is the levels with it off and with it on. So that's a huge difference. Off, on. Okay, so that's the starting point. Now, I would like some more, like a bit more separation, like the highlights don't pop. But I don't want to increase the highlights while like everywhere. I'll probably just do it like in certain sections because over here I would like this to show a little bit more. Not this so much, but maybe this part. I'm thinking I can bring the highlights out a little bit more. And also, I don't want to start bringing out too much detail down here. So I don't want to move the highlights here like and just have the highlights everywhere across the board start popping out. Um, I want to move it in pieces. So in order for me to do that, this is my dodge. And you still have some adjustments over here. Dodge, I use it for the highlights, the burn, for the shadows. The sponge and and smudge, I really don't use those. But I can go through some tutorials and learn how I can use those a little bit in some of my newer pieces that I'm thinking about photographing. But for right now, I'm going to start with the dodge. And you have to select your layer for the actual photograph as a smart object. And then check the settings over here. It's on highlights, even though you can use the dodge for the shadows and the midtones, I like using it on the highlights for the most part. Now, dodge is going to brighten whatever you select. It's going to brighten it. The burn is going to darken whatever of these three that you select. So I have it on the highlights, and then the hardness is at 0. The exposure, I leave it on 50. Because it's more of a finesse, right? I don't want to be heavy handed with the edits. So if you crank your exposure up to 100, I believe that it's just going to be more noticeable what your edits are. And I want these to blend in naturally as much as possible. And then your brush size, you can change this. I want to make it kind of small, maybe about there, and I'll see how that goes. All right, so just remember, you have to be on this layer instead of the levels layer. And then you just, let me see if I can, now since I'm using the Apple Pencil, you guys won't be able to see the cursor anymore, but these are the places I'm going to target, and probably this area over here too, and see how that looks. But again, I want to paint this on just slightly. Now, here's the warning that's always going to pop up. The smart object must be flattened. Do you want to duplicate and flatten the layer? Yes, you have to. So it's going to create a duplicate of the raw photograph so that you can edit using the dodge and burn. So you go ahead and flatten it. Now, of course, you haven't lost the raw file, but here's the one that's going to be edited. So it turned this layer off for you automatically. Let's see, this is okay. Let me just paint a little bit, and that's too much. That's a little bit better. Okay, so the other thing I have to warn you about is that there is no history panel on the version of on the iPad version for Photoshop. So your forward, backward, undo, redo buttons are up here, and that's basically what you have to go by. So you have to keep track of your edits, which is why I don't edit a lot of stuff in here, because it'll just be too hard to keep track of what I have retouched and what I haven't. But you just have to make sure. Oh, see, that's better, the inside. But again, I don't want to be too heavy-handed. It's just little edits at a time to see what it looks like. So I'm just making a small edit, turning it off, turning it back on, just to see what it does. And bring some of this shadow out a little bit. I think that's fine. This up here. Okay, so is that too much? Yeah, it might be too much. I want to go back over it, but not as heavy. Just a little bit. Yeah, that's too much light. Okay, so in the shadows, do I want to bring out some of that? Okay, so the leaf down here, do I want to bring out some of that? Because honestly, I don't know until I change something and I'm like, that might be too much. And you can layer it, right? If you forget where you're at or what you've edited, if you have something that's too dark, you can go back over that same area and burn it to darken it back up if it's too light. Um, but yeah, and it's just going back and forth and shaping, really shaping the composition um, in certain sections. Now, this part over here, I don't know if that's gonna look weird. Yeah, it does. All right, let's go burn. And just the shadow area, I think probably over here. And again, for your shadows, the shadows is selected. You can use pressure for size, protect tones is on. I just go by the brush size so that the edits can be consistent because my pressure is going to change depending on how I'm holding the pencil. Oh wow, that is way dark. Okay, that's too dark. I don't want to be that heavy handed with the shadow. Let's bring this down to 15. And see, now it's not that heavy. It's a little bit more subtle. But problem is this is too small. So we'll bring this up a little bit. And now that's softer. There we go. So it's like you bring the exposure number down so that the shadow is not that heavy. And then you enlarge the size of the brush so that when you add shadow, it's more natural. There's a gradient there. It's not as heavy handed. And you just kind of be careful with that. I do want to brighten this up a little bit. Now, I'm going over everything, right? I'm taking the burn over the highlights as well. And it's kind of layering it back and forth. Um, and I really don't need to. Let me go pull this back. It does that sometimes, it jumps on me. But to really look at it, you make the photo really small and you say, okay, where do I need to change? Right now, everything looks fine. I just think overall it might need to be kicked up a little bit. Yeah, the whites overall might need to be punched up a little bit. It's probably brighter on your screens, but for me, I can tell it's going to be too dark when it prints. So I'm going to come back up here to levels, and my whites are at 166 right now. I jumped to 151. Now the midtones is 0.95. So I think they're fine. Yeah, I think they're fine. I moved it 10 points higher for the whites, like to let in more white. I'm thinking maybe 5 points more, somewhere in there, 3 to 5 points more. Yeah, that saturation is up high. I think that's pretty good. All right, so we're gonna see a before and after. I'm gonna turn this back on. That's the original. I'm gonna turn this off. Turn it back on. So it's just shaping it more. And I'll bring this up closer. So again, we're gonna turn off the dodge and burn off, on. All right. So I like where that is. I just think probably in this area is too dark for what I'm looking at, but I don't want to brighten it that much. It's like right on the edge of where I want it to be. Here's my dodge. Go back to the flattened rasterized image, and then I'll come back over here and see if, let me go gradual. Let's see if I can make this bigger. Right about just outside of that, like that. There we go. So can you see that? That's better. So now, again, like when I'm using my fingers to zoom back, it's always a good idea to use the arrow up here, the move tool, so you don't mark the photograph when you're moving it, because you can edit it with your fingers. So you want to come off of that, the dodge or burn or brush tool, whatever you're on. That's nice. I like the lighting. So do I want to? I'm wondering, do I want to come in here and brighten it just a little bit more? But see, I don't want it to flatten out because that curve, how the light curves with the pedal, I like that part of it, right? And then this being a little bit more flat, it adds some depth to it in a very confined area. But I would come back over here to dodge and, excuse me, and probably, let me see if I can brighten this a little bit without messing it up. Okay, that's on. difference. Wait a minute. Yeah, that's too much. It's too much. Okay, so let me see if I can add a little bit. What about that? Yeah, I think it takes away from the other parts of it though. So maybe if I come closer to this edge. Yeah, I can't tell that much of a difference. What about over here? Yeah, it's too much. All right. So that's where it is. That's the happy spot. Um as far as like this area in here, I think that's where I'm gonna keep it. All right, so back on the move tool up here in the corner. Blow this back up. My focal point is all the way back here. That looks like it's it right there. I was trying to get this front part and I ended up getting this edge right in here. So when you're shooting macro, I mean your focal point it's a very small area, like very small. So it's easy to just miss the place where you want your focus to be. But for what I'm doing right now, I think that this can be it can be off. It looks fine when it's like that. It's out of focus. I think that's nice. Yeah, for this particular shot, I think that will work. Now, of course, what I'm gonna do is print out a sample of this as a 4 by 6 inch. I'll probably use Fuji Pearl because that's a nice paper, but it's inexpensive. And I'm still new with using this pencil, so I'm thinking that this image moves by itself. Um, Let me move this back. There we go. Now, moving if you move that layer and you really don't want to, you can lock it. But I think there's a lock feature in here. These three buttons over here. There's your lock layer right there. But yeah, I think that's pretty good. Now, as far as your spot healing tool, it is here. But the issue that I usually run into is that I'm using the iPad, so sometimes I'll have fingerprints on the screen, dust particles, whatever on the screen. It's just easier to get smudges and whatnot on the screen because sometimes I'm using my fingers, sometimes I'm using the Apple Pencil when I'm moving everything around. So I'll move this back, to the cloud, and then jump on the desktop and finish editing as far as you know getting rid of any spots that I might see on the photograph, any dust particles that was on the camera sensor, just getting rid of all those. It's just a lot easier when I'm doing it from the desktop. But yeah, it's just zooming in. Like, see this? That's definitely a spot on there that I can take out. And again, your band aid or spot healing tool is over here. So you just make sure that you're on the same layer that you use for the dodging and burning, and then you'll be able to use a spot healing brush for that. Yeah, but that's definitely a spot. It might not seem like a big deal right now, but if you can, I'll be able to print this out like a 40-inch by 60-inch. 60 inches 5 feet. So this might not look, and I keep moving the image, but this might not look like a big deal when it's small on here, but once you print it larger, you'll definitely be able to see it. But again, I like the composition. Um, Definitely the curve here. I mean, I like that part. So, all right, last step, because I think this is where I want it right now. Signature. So again, I come up here, click on levels, and I'm just gonna add a layer above that. Now I think if you're clicked on here and you add a layer, it's gonna land in between this layer and your levels layer. And so I want the signature to be on top of everything. So I just click the top layer. I come here to this little box with the plus sign inside. And then there's your new layer right there. And again, this is on the iPad Pro. So if you are working in Photoshop on your desktop or your laptop, the add layers button is going to be in a different place. It just is. All right, so you come here, double click. Um, let's see. And then I can change the name. There we go. All right, so signature. Now, this is pretty simple. As far as the thickness of your signature, you really have to play around with the lines to see how thick you want your signature to be as far as the line width. But for me, I come over to the brush tool. I selected 13 as far as the size, and that contributes to the thickness as well. And then of course the paint is white. You can switch between white and black here, and then the hardness I still have it at 0, because I still want to have some finesse to the signature. All right, so I'm using the Logitech um, keyboard trackpad attachment for the iPad Pro. I'm gonna go ahead and disconnect the keyboard so that I can sign my name on here. Now, just because I signed my name on it doesn't mean I'm finished with it, but since I can't use the Apple Pencil on the desktop laptop, um, I just go ahead and sign it, get my signature on there, and then I can turn the signature layer, off and on when I need it and when I don't need it or it's in the way. So yeah, that's why I put the signature on its own layer. And also, if I want to redo the signature, um, it's on its own layer, and so I can easily go ahead and do that. All right, so let me readjust how my iPad is sitting. And then let me go ahead and switch to the move tool because I want to enlarge this. Right about there. Okay. And there's another dust particle. I see that. I'm going to have to fix it when I move this over. But go back to the brush tool, and kind of get my hand loose here from cramping up. Oh, it moved back. Hold on. It does that on its own. I don't know why. It's probably how I'm moving the pencil is triggering it. That didn't come out right. Hold on. There. Okay, that's the one. That's what I like. Now, of course, my name is not legible, but that's okay. I'm trying to double click it though to go back to full, and it's not. It's not doing it. There we go. All right, it's back to full. Okay, put my keyboard back on, and that is it. Now, of course, you can move the signature around if you want to. Um, so you're still on this signature layer. You still you have the move tool on, and so you can just drag it around. You can resize it if you want to. Um, I think I like it there. Or I can drift it over to the middle like that. But yeah, I like it in the corner for this one. I don't have a certain rule right now where I put it. It's just I'm going by feel at this point is as far as where I put my signature. As long as it looks good, it's not too big, it's not too small. I just practice over and over and over again to see um, how I can what I want the signature to look like. So now some photographers they practice really making their name legible and the same across all their photographs. For me, I just don't want to go through doing that. So, yeah. All right. Now, so for the final part of this is over here, this little button. That's where you can save it. You can save it directly to the iPad Pro, um, or if you have an external hard drive hooked to the iPad, you can um, save the Photoshop file over there. Or what I'm going to do, since I still have a little bit of editing to do, I'm going to keep this on the cloud. Now, with this, um, you don't have to save it like directly to the cloud. It's on the cloud right now. So this is your icon up here that is on the cloud. So all you're going to do is press the home button and it automatically saves it. So once you see that little check mark over there, it's fine. And you can see my signature down here. The edits are already saved. So it's updating as you go, which you have to be careful with. So there, it's like an auto save. If you accidentally auto save something and you can't go back, like if you accidentally make changes, you come back here to this home tab. Um, you can go to adobe.com, find the file that you just worked on, and there's timestamps on there that you can say, okay, go to this particular time where it wasn't messed up yet. Um, and then click on that, and then Adobe, the software, restore it to that particular timestamp. So just be mindful of that when you're working from the Adobe Cloud. But again, here's all my images down here. Um, Yeah, so this particular flower, I mean, I worked on it here. I'm not sure why I can't delete this one, but I'll try to get rid of that later. But I think this one is finished and this one is finished. Same flower or set of flowers that I was working with, just really different um, compositions, interpretations of it. And I will move them over to the desktop, go through the healing brush, work on them, and then save them to the hard drive, um, and then that'll be it. So that's really uh, my process, the process that I go through. Um, but specifically, as I close, you're using light and shadow, right, to shape the composition so that for me it's less boring because you can have a really nice flower that you've taken a photograph of, but it looks flat as far as the lighting. So for me, I use lighting that's more dramatic, or I can use the word cinematic in approach, because that's the type of thing, the type of style that inspires me. Of course, there are photographers like we talked about before that just use flat lighting and that's their style. So you have to, find out what you want to do and what works for you. Um, but for me, it's like the beginner photographers that come to me and ask for advice on how I create my work. This is definitely what I do um, to make the work more interesting. Right. So I'm sharing these steps with you guys so that you can practice on your own work. But the main key, the number one key, is the composition. Like when if you're in studio, you're outside, you're photographing something, get the composition and the lighting right as much as possible. If you underexpose something slightly, that's okay. If you overexpose something slightly, that's still okay. As long as it's not the extreme over or underexposed, it's going to be really hard when you jump into editing to try to fix that. Um, so, yes, it moved again. Let me put my pencil down. I'm going to dock the pencil again. So, I'm going to go back to the beginning, just a recap. That's where I started. And so it's kind of a dull, dreary flower. It's the composition, I can tell the composition is good, but it doesn't have any punch to it. Um, even the colors are kind of grayed out, you know. So you don't want this flat gray tone on there, but you can already see where your highlights would be because this pops out a little bit, this comes out a little bit. So you can already tell where your highlights are going to be. You can definitely see the shadows where the shadows are going to be. So it's just enhancing what's already there in the photograph, right? And again, this is the negative, right? So I started with the levels and I got it to there. Now this is better, but it's still flat, right? It's better as far as the brightness goes, but it's still flat. I can see, the petals better, but it's still flat to me. Now to give it more like a three-dimensional feel to it, it just highlight the shadows. Well, highlight the highlights, like brighten the highlights, I should say. Brighten your highlights. I didn't do anything to the shadows. The midtones, I brightened them a little bit in areas. I darkened them a little bit in areas. It's just midtones. You kind of have to go one way or the other depending on what's going on in the photograph. But brighten the highlights, and then I kind of darken the shadows over here, and then I brighten this area for sure. And that is on this flat layer. So once I turn that on, there you go. And it's not a huge, like I did my best not to overdo the edit, like make everything too bright or too dark, but you try to find some type of middle ground and a balance between the two. And it just takes a while of going back and forth. Um, if you edit something too much, too heavy, you just go undo, undo. Um, but you just kind of just go back and forth between undo, redo, and see if the edit is too much or not enough. Or sometimes you'll edit something and find out that you don't have to edit that section of the photograph at all. So it just depends on what the photograph does. And then once you get it to a decent spot, your shadows, like some photographers will do the complete opposite of me. They will brighten this up as much as they can because they want more detail in the shadows. For me, it just depends on the photograph, but I don't need or care to see that much detail in the shadows. I just left a little bit, especially in this corner here, and then the leaf here falls into the shadow. So it's just a little bit back there um, to help with the composition. Uh, but other than that, I mean, my favorite part of this is probably this yellow in here. I brightened it up a little bit, but then I darkened this side. So it's a little bit of burning, a little bit of dodging, and it's kind of layered on top of each other with the dodge and burn. So that that gradient is more of a smooth transition from light to dark. You don't want something that looks like you stamped a spotlight on it or you stamped like a section of shadow in it. You just want that transition from light to dark to be as gradual as possible, but still have them at a little bit more of an extreme because this is like extreme dark here almost, and then it gradually goes lighter. So you just have to be careful with it. Um, the larger your brush is, the easier it is for that transition from light to dark, dark to light. But especially in areas like this, you don't want your brush to be really large because it's gonna lighten or darken too much of the area. So you just have to play around with how much area you have to adjust. And then this particular area, um, I pushed it a little bit lighter and then found that was too much. And so now I just left this the way it was. I don't think it needs to go lighter or darker. I think it's fine in the middle. So now you have this part jumping out and this part I lightened just a little bit. But if I would have went crazy with this, it would have been too bright. So I think this is fine. Um, I'm gonna check over it on the print sample to make sure that it's okay. Um, but yeah, other than that, I think it's fine. Now, as far as the prints, if I order something like a Fuji Pearl paper, it's gonna take 2 maybe 3 days max for the lab to finish it for it to develop. And then since they're on the opposite side of the continent from me, it's going to take a few days for shipping as far as for it to get here. So what I like to do is I like to order a bunch of samples at one time, of just 4 inch by 6 inch prints, nothing like really crazy or expensive. Order that on pretty good, photo paper, and see how the work came out. Make sure that it's not printing too dark. And like I said before, your monitor brightness, turn it down dramatically, um, and then brighten the photograph from there so that when you get the print, it doesn't print too dark for you. And then, of course, the last thing I added on here was my signature with the Apple Pencil. And so it's down there in the corner for this one. So, yeah, I think I like it. The only other thing that I do with this once I add it to the website is the title. Um, I don't know what I'm going to name this. I have to name it something. But I have to name it something. But yeah, let's see. I'm going to go ahead and show you guys the intro for this. And so here it is, my website. And so I have plenty of work on here. And then, like I said before, the Eric C. Jackson Studio Podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and then I believe there's Google Podcasts as well. And so this will be added there for everyone to listen to. But this is really uh, something that's for visual presentation. So I hope everyone got something out of it. But this is where I add everything, and yeah, I'm just looking to add some new work, probably with some more color to it, more dramatic lighting, and see where the work goes. Now, my next idea, oh my goodness, um, it's a lot brighter. It's a lot brighter, and it's probably gonna be on the white background. And so I'm gonna do some shopping tomorrow and see what material I want to use for it, because I have the idea in mind, but um, concept to what I actually capture when I start photographing it can be different things. But um, if anyone wants to look at the rest of my work, it is at ericcjacksonstudio.com. ericcjacksonstudio.com. Or you can just Google my name, Eric C. Jackson. I don't even think you need the studio included. And my work is pretty ranked pretty high on the search engine, so I'll come up there. But yeah, oh my goodness, I don't know if I'm gonna turn this into a series of work, or if I'm just gonna add the flowers to the nature um, collection. I don't know. But yeah, like this one, I definitely want to add on to pieces like this. So this is one of the other pieces that I did. I had a lot of fun just photographing the flowers, and so now I want to dive back into it and see what I come up with. So really, really, really fun. All right, so that's what I have for right now. If anyone has any questions, comments, photos that you want me to look at and need advice on, I don't mind the I don't mind. Just leave a message in the comments, and or you can send an email to me through the website, or if you're looking at this, listening to this on the podcast, whether it's on Spotify, there's I believe there's a comment section below where you can leave the message for me. So thank you everyone for listening. I really do appreciate it. Take care. God bless.